All right, guys. Well, how we doing? Good. It is so good to see you guys here in the room and you guys catching up with us online. We're so pumped that you're with us. It's week 4 of The Bones Are Good, and we are talking about how to build a life that survives even chaos and craziness and a world that is out of control. And so I want to talk about a couple things before we jump right in. Any of the guys in the room make it to Promise Keepers this weekend? Awesome. So glad you guys were there. I got to sneak by for a little bit, but we had a Promise Keepers simulcast Friday night, Saturday. Bunch of men packing this room out and just having a blast, being challenged and talking about some really, really important things. So thank you to all the guys that were here. Thank you to the staff and the volunteers that made it happen. It was just an unbelievable couple of days. And we have the cutest week ever coming up this week. It is Extreme Explorers, which is our preschool VBS here on campus Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, which means there's going to be a whole bunch of 3 to 5-year-olds running around downstairs. And I got to tell you, man, I got 2 kids that get to go this year. And at the end, they do this thing where they get up on the stage and they do their songs and their dances. And my favorite is that, like, they teach them, they choreograph them, and they, like, are supposed to be doing a real dance, but everybody's doing something different. And it's the best. It's awesome. So if you have little kids in preschool, 3 to 5 years old, make sure you get them signed up. Get them here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning. It's going to be an awesome time. But I got to tell you a little bit about myself. I am the grandson of a dairy farmer. And if you know anything about dairy families, you know that we are mostly milk and cheese. We actually had this plaque in our kitchen in our house that said, it was these 2 little mice. They were so cute. They were like leaning over and kissing each other. And it said this on the plaque. It said, "A meal without cheese is like a kiss without a squeeze." And so that's what I grew up with in my house. It was like everything and anything, you just put more cheese on it to make it taste better. And then you wash it yes, somebody knows. You get 2-3 glasses of milk per meal, and every celebration is ice cream, and everything is just dairy, right? And so fast forward till I'm like 34, 35 years old. Life is kind of a struggle. My body's not doing great. I'm like itching. I'm getting headaches. So I go to the doctor, and I find out that this guy has a dairy allergy. That was the day my life ended. Now, thankfully, it's not like a go to the hospital dairy allergy. And so every once in a while, I still get to cheat. But it's rough being me. My world is dark. And I got to say something. And I get to say this because I am now one of us. But all you free people out there, you're gluten-free, you're dairy-free, you're meat-free, you're something free. Stop handing out your imitations and telling us that we won't be able to taste the difference. Okay? It's just not true. You can't taste the difference because it's been 8 years since you had the real thing. But we can taste the difference. Okay, you're not fooling anybody. We just have to stop. But there's this thing that happens in my life now. Because I can handle the cheese, sort of. I can handle not having real butter and not drinking a glass of milk. But ice cream? Oh. And there's some good dairy-free ice creams out there, but it's not the same thing. So I have a confession to make. Is this a safe place? Are we okay right now? Okay. I cheat. I cheat on my dairy-free diet. Boo. Oh, man. There's haters today. And here's what happens every single time. You know, maybe it's like end of the school year, or, you know, my son has a great baseball game or whatever. We go out for ice cream because that's how you celebrate. And so I decide, you know what, it'll be okay. I'm just going to get the real thing. And here's what happens. Every single time I take the first bite and I'm like, oh, it's so good. And I tell my wife, I should have learned by now, but I tell my wife, this has to be the single best ice cream cone that anyone has ever made. It's so creamy. It's so perfect. It's so amazing. And she looks at me and she's like, you're a doofus. We are at Sonic right now. This is not gourmet ice cream. You just haven't had the real thing in like 6 years. Now, you may not be dairy-free or gluten-free or whatever free there is else out there. But you've had those kind of experiences. You've had those kind of experiences where you're cruising through life, right? And something shows up in your life to just wake you up. And you thought it was an ordinary day. And then something that is just, it's the real thing shows up. Maybe it's happened to you when you're driving in your car, listening to the pop station so you can dance around and sing along, right? And all of a sudden this song comes on that you haven't ever heard before, and it just rips your chest open, opens up your soul, and speaks to something in you that you're like, wow, I was not expecting that. Next thing you know, you're on the side of the road like, I can't drive right now. I got to pull myself together. Maybe it's happened to you at a movie theater, right? You went to the movies, it's Friday night, you're like just chilling, you're going to be entertained, and then all of a sudden this film happens right in front of you, and you're like, oh my word. Anybody else see Remember the Titans? Anybody else think it was a football movie? I went to see that thinking I was going to see a football movie. I'm like wrecked afterwards. Maybe it's happened to you just walking down the road, walking down the sidewalk, right? And you're not paying attention to what time it is. And then all of a sudden it's sunset and the sky just explodes and it's on fire with the pinks and the purples and the oranges, and you're like stopping traffic staring at it. Or a shooting star at night. Maybe it's happened to you in a church service. You showed up and it was going to be ordinary, average weekend. You're just sort of doing your thing, right? But then something happens, some song or something that's said, and you go, I'm not the same person I was when I walked into this room. Or a relationship, a conversation with somebody. You meet a new friend and you're thinking, yeah, talk about sports, talk about the weather, talk about work, and then 2.5 hours later, you realize you got a new best friend and you're never going to forget this day. The day you met a person who just gets your soul. See, the Bible has a word for this. It's the word glory, and it's not a word that we use an awful lot these days, except in worship songs. But it's a word that means substance and weight. It's a word we use to describe something that's heavy. And actually, we use this word more than we think about, because when we talk about people who are solid, you ever use that word to describe somebody? Just solid. One of those people that you feel like you can just physically lean on and they'll hold you up, right? Because they've built something into their life. They've built the kind of character that's going to last. They've got good bones. And ultimately, I mean, when we use this word and when the Bible uses this word, a lot of times it's talking about God. Because ultimately, God is the one where all of this comes from, right? He's the most glorious. He's the one who has the most substance. He's the one we can lean on the most out of everyone. And this is what the Bible means and what we mean when we say, when I'm weak, you're strong, right? You're the shepherd and I'm the sheep. And when I'm confused, you give clarity. All of these things have to do with the fact that God's the one that we can trust. He's the one that we can lean on. And part of being His means that He gives us the ability to build that too. And that's a really important thing. Because the question we're asking today is, how do I get that? How do I get that kind of life like that third little piggy in the story? You know the story, right? The little piggies and the wolf's chasing them, and one of them builds his house out of hay. I don't even know how you do that. Next one builds his house out of sticks. Third one's smarter than everybody else. He builds his house out of bricks. How do you be that guy? Because the wolf can't get in your house then. One of the things really important to recognize is if you read the Bible, you'll see that this is not some supernatural thing that you're just born with. And we have this weird idea in our heads that certain people, they just get this sort of faith thing. And I'm just not one of those people. But you know what? Abraham, when God met him, he was like a confused, lost, idol-worshiping pagan. Do you know that? He wasn't always who he became. He built it. And God showed him how. So the question on the table is, how do we get that third little piggy kind of life? There's this line in the song, we've been taking our titles from this song, The Bones by Maren Morris, and there's this line that says, the wolves, they came and went, but we're still standing. And someday all of this chaos and craziness is going to be over. It might be like 50, 60 years, the way things are going. But what's it going to be like to look back? Are you going to be the person who's able to say, you know what, 2020 was nuts. But at the end of the day, I actually got stronger. At the end of the day, yeah, I lost my job, but I learned what was really important. Yeah, we all quarantined, but I learned to love my family better. Yeah, my money went crazy, but I realized it wasn't the most important thing in my life. How do you build that kind of life? See, Job, if you don't know, there's a guy in the Bible named Job. Life was pretty rough for him. Lost everything. You can go read the beginning of the book to find out exactly how this went. But Job is really honest. And it's one of the things I love about this book is Job tells us what it feels like to be right in the middle of that rock bottom extreme suffering place. And this is a guy who loves God. He knows God. He's got a lot of faith. But he also tells us the truth about what it feels like to feel abandoned by God. And so he says this. He's talking about God in Job 23. It's in your notes if you got the paper notes, or you can pull it up on the app, or you can follow along in your Bible if you want. But he says this. He says, if I go to the east, God, he's not there. If I go to the west, I don't find him. When he's at work in the north, I don't see him. When he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him. This is what it feels like to be in extreme suffering. But he says this. He says, but he knows the way that I take. And when he's tested me, I will come forth as gold. And gold is one of those things, right? When you hold it in your hands, it feels heavy, right? It feels substantive. It's valuable because it has that solidness, that fullness, that glory we've been talking about. And Job says that kind of life is built. Now, before we go any further, I want to make sure you know that nothing I say today is about the past. And you may be sitting here already going, I got so much regret. I've made so many mistakes. And this solid life that you're talking about, I mean, that'd be nice, but I don't think that's anything I'm ever going to have. Well, listen, before anything else, you need to know Jesus died to make sure you knew that your life is about right now, today, and about the future. And I don't care if you're 6 or 106. If you're still breathing, you still have the opportunity to live a life that matters. And so do not let regret or shame or doubt or guilt or fear make you think that this is not for you. Because it is. It's for you, and it's for me, and it's for every other screw up that has ever lived on the planet Earth. Okay? All right, so let's talk about the wolves for a second. What are the wolves? Well, there's a verse that Jason actually ended with last time, and he was talking about the storms, right? The storms that come. And the truth is, the way the world works is that you're probably either right on the tail end of a storm that you're just getting out of, or you're right in the middle of one, or you're about to go in one. It's good news all day today. That's how it is, right? And so Paul gives us this pattern of life, right? That this is what suffering does in our lives. And he says this. He says, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And some of you read a verse like that and you go, no, it doesn't. I don't know what Paul's thinking. That's not what suffering does in my life. We need to understand that Paul's giving us kind of a best case scenario here. He's saying, hey, this is when we respond the right way to suffering. This is when we lean into God and not away in the midst of suffering. It produces endurance and it produces character and it produces hype. It produces hope. But for some of us, when we respond by giving up and taking shortcuts and giving into temptation, it doesn't go that way. And so we're going to look at this verse kind of from the other side here for a minute. And we're going to look at the temptations that are behind what Paul tells us. Okay, so there's 4 wolves that he gives us. And the first one, he tells us straight out, suffering. Right? The first wolf is suffering. And I want you to have this picture in your head of this little piggy with the wolf circling around the house, right? Trying to find a way in. And one of the ways that wolf gets in is through suffering. All of us are going to deal with it. All of us are going to experience it. Some of us are still living in the suffering of our past and of our childhood. Some of us are living in the suffering that is right now, right here, today. You know, I've been coaching for quite a while, mostly baseball, a couple other sports as well. And you know the kid I want on my team? You know, it's fun to have a kid who just has talent coming out his ears and can't do anything wrong and just walks on the field and everybody else just gives up. That's fun. But you know the kid I want on my team? I want the kid who doesn't give up. I want the kid who takes a baseball in the face and goes, put me back in, coach. I can do it. Right? Blood on the uniform, the whole thing. I want that kid on my team. Is that you? Is that you when you suffer? Just get back up. Hit me again. Right? The second wolf that chases us down, shortcuts. Shortcuts. See, Paul says that suffering produces endurance, right? Perseverance. Well, what's the opposite of endurance? It's a shortcut. It's trying to find the easy way out of whatever hard situation you're in. Maybe you're in debt. Shortcut is that get-rich-quick scheme. It's the payday loan. It's the friend that wants to make your life great with their business plan for your life. It's that promise that you don't have to work. I'm just going to hand you money. It's a shortcut. You know what the biggest one is, honestly, I think, in our world right now? Because, listen, life's tough, man. Work's hard, especially when you're in a job you don't really like. Raising kids, it's hard. Having a marriage, having a relationship, it's hard. Figuring out how to take care of your money, it's hard. Having friendships with people who aren't perfect, it's hard. You know what's real easy is getting home from work every day and going 3 hours of TV and then sleep. It's a shortcut. It's easy to numb, but numb isn't alive. And we run. We run from the conversations we need to have. We run from the relationships we need to build. We run from the decisions that we know we need to make. We run from the hard things. We run to addiction. We run to substances. We run to pornography. We run to all kinds of things that will just send the hard stuff away for a while. And Paul goes, it's not the kind of house you want to build. It's like a broken bone, you know. Can't shortcut it. Break your leg, you can't just start walking on it again the next day. You got to wait till it heals. Then the third wolf, Paul says, is dishonesty. Dishonesty. See, he says suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, right? What's the opposite of character? It's dishonesty. It's the willingness to lie to get what I want, to manipulate, to deceive even myself. Dishonesty is when I'm not willing to look in the mirror and tell the truth about who I am and the decisions I've made and where my life is leading me. And you know what's interesting about this one is that we know that when we're in grief, denial is a natural part of the process. We're all going to go through a period of denial, and there's no like timeline on grief. It's not like you're supposed to be better after a year or 2 years or 6 months or whatever. But you know what? If you're living your life in denial, you're not really living your life. At some point, we have to look reality in the face and go, you know what? What am I going to do with the rest of my life? So that wolf circling that house, it's dishonesty. And then finally, if we give in to those first 3 wolves, we end up in hopelessness. That's the 4th one. Hopelessness. See, Paul says that suffering produces character, and then endurance, and then hope. Because when we go through suffering like Job did, we end up on the other side able to look back and say, you know what, I survived that. And then next time I survived that. And then next time, you know what, I survived that. And this too shall pass, right? But when we give in over and over and over again, and we keep taking the shortcuts, and we keep numbing, and we keep running, we don't have that hope. And at some point, we end up in that pit of despair and hopelessness. So what do we do? How do we build? I mean, this has been so encouraging so far, right? How do we build a life that survives those wolves? Well, let me tell you a secret about that little piggy. He wasn't just building a house for the wolf. It wasn't about protecting him from the wolf. It was about protecting him from everything. It's about building a house that would stand, whether there was a wolf or a flood or a fire or an earthquake or hailstorm or whatever. Because building the house matters no matter what comes against you. And guys, 2020 has thrown at us things we never thought would get thrown at us, right? Maybe you've never noticed this about the Bible. But if you read the Bible, I would encourage you to notice that God doesn't actually defend himself very often. And the world that the Old Testament was written in, when we first start reading the story of God, it was a world full of all kinds of competitors, all kinds of other gods in Egypt and in Babylon and Assyria and everywhere. And God could have spent the whole Old Testament going, hey, I just want to make sure you know I'm not like him, I'm not like her, I'm not like them. But he doesn't. He starts out with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And he said, I'm going to tell you my story. I'm going to tell you the truth about who you are, about who I am, about what it means to live the right kind of life, the best kind of life that's actually going to satisfy you. I'm going to tell you the truth about what it means to be human. And then you can go look elsewhere if you want, and you can read those other stories, but you know what you're going to find? You're going to find crumbling sand over there. Because you have tasted and seen the real thing. You have had real ice cream. And you can tell the difference. And a couple thousand years later, this guy named John tells us why God chose to do it that way. And it's so cool. I love this principle in John 1:5. I want you to look at this with me. He says, the light shines in the darkness, and darkness can never extinguish it. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. You know what my favorite thing is that doesn't exist? A dark bulb. You ever seen a dark bulb? Me neither. You know why a dark bulb doesn't exist? Because light and dark, they're not fighting each other. There's no battle between light and dark. Dark is just what happens when the lights get shut off. And as soon as the light shows up again, the dark is gone, it disappears, and there's no battle. The only place that dark does anything is in the movies. And the movies have been lying to us this whole time. Dark and light, they don't fight each other. There's no battle between dark and light is certainly not threatened by darkness. Never seen a light bulb go, oh no. There's no such thing as a dark bulb and a light bulb like duking it out, wondering who's going to win, right? It does not work that way. I mean, John's smart, but he's not all that smart. He's just telling us the truth. Light shines in the darkness. Darkness runs. Goes away. It disappears. Darkness will never overcome light. And your life, as you do what we're talking about today, as you build this house that's going to still stand no matter what wolves, what storms, what tornadoes, what floods, or what fires show up, you build that house. You build that life. Because it's worth it. And it's better. And it doesn't fall down even when the world is going crazy. This may seem really, really weird to you. But I'm a little excited about how nuts our country is right now. Now, don't get me wrong. I have no joy or pleasure in families falling apart or the economy getting wrecked or politics going crazy. I have no joy in abuse or abandonment. But I want to tell you, I grew up here in Colorado. And in Colorado, there's not ever been a time when everybody was like supposed to be religious. It's always been kind of this place where people kind of do their own thing. And so for me, growing up, at some points in my upbringing, my family chose to go to church, and there were people I knew that didn't choose to go to church, and they'd find out I did, and it was kind of like, cool. You do your thing, I do my thing. You know, we have different kind of weekends. Fine, whatever. But there was never any social value, never any social benefit to being a Christian. And so all the people that I knew that were Christians, I knew that it was pretty authentic, right? Because there was no like manipulative cultural thing that said, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to live your life. And so people didn't really fake it because there was no reason to. It's really interesting when I went out to college. I went to college in the South, Bible Belt. It's called that for a reason, right? And in the South, there's still this social thing that says, hey, if you don't go to church, you made a choice not to. Because that's just what everybody does. And everybody's supposed to behave and be nice and like love Jesus and read the Bible and stuff. Well, that makes it really easy to do it for all the wrong reasons. And when I went out there, it was really interesting because I met some incredible, incredible people who love God and love the Bible and were living their lives really, really well. And then I met a lot of people who were just sort of floating. They look like Christians, they talk like Christians, they did the right things for all the wrong reasons. And they're faking it. And sometimes it's really hard to tell the difference. And so I'm excited about how jacked up our world is right now. And this is not outside of the U.S. This is not the way it is the rest of the world. But in the U.S., we're in this place for the first time in maybe a couple hundred years where just doing the normal stuff that God says to do and just taking God seriously about the basics, like human value and how you treat people and the purpose of money and the purpose of work and the fact that every single person on the planet is your brother or sister and created in the image of God, and the fact that you have money not for you, but to help out other people and to be involved in something bigger than yourself, and the fact that your life has never been about you, and the fact that serving others is more important than your pride, and the fact that people are more important than money, and the fact that you should be investing your life in something that's going to outlast you, all of those things, the fact that good things are actually worth waiting for. When you live your life that way, you stand out. People notice. And so I'm kind of excited about how crazy the world is. Not because we're trying to be different or weird, but because there's actually something better. I got a friend. He's a firefighter. If you know anything about the kind of schedule and life of a firefighter, you know they kind of hunker down together while they're on shift together. They get to know each other super well. And this guy, 4 or 5 years ago, got engaged, and he and his fiance, they bought a house together. And so he's telling the guys about it, you know, and he said, yeah, she's moving in this weekend, and then once we get married, I'm going to move in too. And they were like, whoa, what'd you just say? He said, we bought a house. No, not that part. What'd you say after that? She's going to move into our house? Like she's taking her stuff? They're like, yeah, that part. What was the other thing you said? I'm going to do that too after we're married? Yeah. What's that all about? That's weird, man. Why would you do that? They had no concept of this idea that good things are worth waiting for. And listen, this is a guy, he's not perfect, never claimed to be perfect, and he's certainly not this super outspoken Christian guy. He didn't walk into the firehouse and go, well, let me tell you what we talked about at church this weekend and when I was leading worship. And he's like super chill, laid back dude, and he's got pretty messy childhood. He's just living his life, doing the normal stuff. It stood out. And so I want to talk for a minute about what it looks like to build a life that is worth other people going, hey, you know what? I want that. And it's not the kind of I want that that's like, hey, he's got a lot of money, or hey, she lost a lot of weight, or hey, I want their clothes or their car or their house. I'm talking about the kind of I want that goes, 2020 was bananas, and my life has fallen apart. Why isn't hers? And let's remember, before we get into this, I'm not talking about the past. I'm not talking about regrets, and I am certainly not talking about some sort of fake polished life. I'm talking about your core, your bones. All right? So we get into the book of Philippians. And we're going to learn a couple of things from Paul. And I want to read this passage all at once, and then we're going to come back and make some observations about what it looks like to build that third little piggy life. All right? So he says in Philippians 2, 12 through 16. Okay, just follow along with me. We're going to read this whole thing, then we'll zoom in on a little bit of it. He says, what I'm getting at, friends, is that you should simply keep on doing what you've done from the beginning. When I was living among you, you lived in responsive obedience. I love that term. Responsive obedience. That's the kind of thing he's talking about. He's talking about a kind of life that looks at God, sees that God's really super smart, and that God tells us the way to live a life that matters, and we go, yep, I'm in. Okay, that's what responsive obedience means. He says, now that I'm separated from you, keep it up. Better yet, redouble your efforts. Be energetic in your life of salvation, reverent and sensitive before God. That energy is God's energy. In other words, when we do that, when we live that life of responsive obedience, God joins with us and gives us an energy and a strengthening that allows us to continue forward in that. Okay, so he says that energy that you gain access to when you live your life this way is God's energy in you. It's an energy deep within you, God himself willing and working at what will give him the most pleasure. Do everything readily and cheerfully, no bickering, no second guessing allowed. Go out into the world uncorrupted. And I love this image. A breath of fresh air in this squalid and polluted society. And we're not done, but if I can take a little bit of liberty here, this is right at home, right now. A breath of fresh air in a world that has lost its ever-loving mind. Okay? And he's going to give us our purpose. So if you're a believer, if you're a Christian, and you can hear this, okay, this is your purpose, right? He says, provide people with a glimpse of good living and of the living God. Carry the light-giving message into the night, so I'll have good cause to be proud of you on the day that Christ Jesus returns. You'll be living proof that I didn't go into all this work for nothing. I love that image he gives us of the breath of fresh air. You ever swam a long way underwater? When I was a kid, my dad, my brother, and I used to have these contests when we were like staying at a hotel and there was a pool. We'd try to get as far as we could underwater, and I don't know why, my dad would always beat us. I think he was like an adult. But we would go as far as we can, right? And you're swimming and you're swimming and you're swimming, and pretty soon you feel like your lungs are going to explode, and there's that first breath when you come up, and it's like, oh, still alive. Is that what it's like to walk into your life? Is that what it's like to be around you? Because I can tell you, and you know this too, even if you're not on social media, which is ridiculous right now, everyone around you feels like they're drowning. But when you show up, is it that moment of, oh, finally, something I can trust, someone I can lean on, something stable, something solid. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know if you're there right now. I don't know if you're that person in your community, but you can be. So how do we get there? Well, Paul says first, I'll survive the wolves if I build on God's principles and not people's opinions. I build my life on God's principles and not people's opinions. So if you're that little piggy, you're building that house, you got to start with the foundation, right? You got to start with that concrete foundation. And the foundation, first and foremost, before everything else, is the gospel. It's the fact that salvation has been given to you. You are forgiven. You are set free. There is no guilt. There is no shame. The past is wiped away, and you start fresh today. And that's why I can say we're not talking about the past today. We're talking about now, and we're talking about the future. Okay? But that foundation is God's principles. It's what God says is important. It's why God put you on the planet. And I'll just give you a little teaser hint. It's not to make a bunch of money and then die. So we build our lives on God's principles, not people's opinions. And Paul says this. He says, therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. In other words, see, he's talking to this church that he was there with them for a while. And he says, listen, you guys were doing great when I was there, but if me standing over your shoulder telling you what to do was the only reason you were obeying, you missed the whole thing. It's not about who's watching or who you're trying to please. And I want you to ask yourself this. How much of what you have done, spent your money and your time and your energy on in the past couple of weeks, has been about someone else? Trying to either please them or manipulate them or make them think that you're awesome. Has it been 20%? 60%? 80%? How much of what you do is an attempt to impress or manipulate or please somebody else besides God? Paul says if you're building your life on that foundation, it's going to crumble. It's going to crash. It's not going to work. Then he says this. He says, second thing we got to do is we got to work for what God says is important. We got to work for what God says is important. And if no one's told you this week, I want to remind you that the TV and the Facebook and the TikTok and the Twitter and the advertisements and the NFL and everybody else, they are terrible guides when it comes to what's actually important. They don't know. They're just trying to get your money. And maybe you look at God's list of things that are important, like people and generosity and service and humility and integrity, and you go, mine's upside down. Well, you know what? That's great information. It's really important to know because you got to flip your list. Somehow we still think that being famous and getting a whole lot of money is going to make us happy. Really? Did you watch any famous people recently? They don't actually have it figured out. And Paul, he says in verse 13, I love this part. He says, it's God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Circle those two W words. To will and to work for his good pleasure. You know you're in charge of your taste buds? Really? I'm serious. You can train your taste buds. You may think you're like a slave to your cravings and you just like what you like and don't like what you don't like, but try this sometime. Find somebody who gave up soda like 6 years ago and hand them a Coke. Tell them to take a drink. Even if it was their favorite drink. You know what will happen? One drink. Coolest faces you'll ever see. Why? They train their taste buds. And they have learned to want different things than they used to want. And so your want is actually under your control. And the first step to wanting the things you know you should want is to want the things that you want to want. I'm going to have to tell you a story, aren't I? We know we don't want the things we should want. But the first step is wanting to want those things. You can learn to love things. And here's my advice for you with that. If you know you don't want what you should want, but you want to want what you know you should want, find someone who already wants what you want to want and start hanging out with them. And their want will rub off on you. I was a sophomore in high school. I was kind of on the bubble about whether or not I was going to keep playing football. I've been playing since I was 7 or 8 years old, but it wasn't there. I hadn't really found my niche with football. I was big, but I couldn't run fast. I was super gangly, really, really skinny. My feet were as big as half the rest of my body. Just wasn't good. But one summer, we were on vacation. My dad ran into this guy. I don't remember his name. We'll call him Kevin. Kevin was a college football player. Big old dude, defensive end, arms as big as my head, no neck, the whole thing. Dude was yoked, right? I have never met a person as passionate about anything as this guy was about football. So my dad introduces me to this guy, and he talks my ear off for 2 hours about football, about what it's like to play in college. You know what I did? I was 14. I was slow. I went back to the hotel. Mind you, this is Ohio in the summer. Okay, it's like 95 degrees at night and humid. I ran wind sprints in the street outside the hotel. I'm going to the NFL. Why? Because I wanted what he had. I wanted to love what he loved. I just wanted to love something that much. And sometimes when our want is not what we want it to be, we have to learn from someone else. And so find the people who love the things that you want to love. Because you're actually in charge of your taste buds. And then as we start building, we've built this foundation on God's principles, right? And we started building these walls based on the things that God actually says is important, because God says that people are more important than money. And God says that you need to live a life that outlasts you. And God says that every single person that you will ever meet in your life, no matter who they are, what they look like, where they come from, how much money they have or don't have, what language they speak, or how offensive they are, or what they smell like, is created in the image of God, and they're your brother or your sister. And when you start building your life that way, there's this problem that happens. At some point or another, even though you're building on the right foundation, even though you're building the right house, at some point or another, the work gets dreary. I want you to write that down. I got to stick to the plan when the work gets dreary. I got to stick to the plan because you guys, you know what? Honestly, I think a lot of you guys, you're here because you want this. And you're building your life on the right foundation. You're trying to build a life that's not selfish and all about you. And you're trying to build a life where you're raising your kids and influencing other people, and you're doing things the way that God says to do them, and you're building this life, but you're in the dreary middle. And you started that relationship or that marriage for all the right reasons, and now you're married to this person who's kind of frustrating because they're like human. You had those kids and they were super awesome at first, and then they grew up and got their own opinions, and you're like, why are you doing this to me? And you got that job and it was so fun and exciting and new, and then you realized it was work and there were other people there. You're trying to get out of debt, and it was like fun when that first $1,000 went through, and now you're like, this is like, we're not close to the end. We're not close to the beginning. Because you know what? I worked construction for a while. And you know what's really fun when you're building a house? Day one. Showing up, foundation's there, and you're like getting ready to frame it out, and you got your team, and you're like, and there's walls. You know what's not fun? Day 72. And Paul, he calls our bluff, right? He says, do all things without grumbling or disputing. So sometimes you just got to get back up and stick to it. Because when you know you're building on the right foundation, and you know you're building the right house, and you know you got the right bricks, and you know you're the right little piggy, sometimes you're still only halfway up the wall and the bricks are getting heavy. Doesn't get a whole lot more complicated than wake up, do it again. But here's the thing about this. Sometimes when it does get dreary, it gets dreary because we forgot why. Forgot why we started. Forgot what it was all about. Forgot why we decided to build the house in the first place. And this is something that's probably going to surprise us because, we're Americans and we're all independent and we think that everything's about us. We think that all this has been about having successful kids and stable, secure life, protected from all that stuff out there that might try to get us. But Paul ends this passage with a left turn that tells us why we're doing all of this in the first place. He says this, I'll survive the wolves if I give away the best of what I build. If I give away the best of what I build. See, your life has never been about you. It's never going to be about you. It's certainly not about safety and security. Your life and all of this building that we've been talking about is for others. See these words in English? So that. Those are why words. And he's talking about all the things that we've said so far, right? He says, do all of that so that what? So that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a crooked and depraved generation in which you shine like stars in the universe as you hold out the word of life. There's two pictures in that verse. One of them is that moment when you walk outside your house at midnight. Maybe you're taking the trash out, but you've been working and you had your head down and you're just busy and life is busy and you haven't even stopped to take a breath for a minute. You've been there, right? You're just running and running and running and running and you don't notice things anymore. It's tunnel vision, but at some point, for some reason, you decide that you're going to go walk outside your house and you got to do something. Then you look up. Whew. Shooting star. Full moon. Milky Way. And you just stand there and look. Why? Because God just invaded your life. And you realize that there is something so much bigger than doing the dishes and taking out the trash and making another dollar. Is that what you do in people's lives? Is that what it's like to meet you? Is that what it's like to hang out with your family? The other image he gives, and this one I love even more, he says, as you hold out the word of life, it's this image of a host holding out food, the best food the host can afford to a weary, exhausted traveler and someone they don't even know. Is that you? Is that the normal pattern of your life? Is that why you do the things that you do, so that you can have enough stability and enough strength and enough character to be the one that's still standing? Because, see, we have this image, right, of building this house. And you're the little piggy in the neighborhood full of all the houses with sticks and straw. And the tornado and the storm comes through and knocks everybody's house down but yours. What do you do? What do you do then? Paul tells us. Tells us you make about 50 copies of your key and you go hand them out. And you say, you know what? I don't care that you took shortcuts when you built your house. I don't care that you weren't ready for this. I don't care what you look like. I don't care that you got tattoos and your hair's all messed up. I don't care that you burned your own house down. I don't have a lot, but I got some food. I got a couple places to sleep. Here's my key. My house is still standing. Jesus, he gives us these beautiful words in Matthew 11. He says, are you weary and carrying a heavy burden? Come to me. I will refresh your life, for I am your oasis. And you know what? We need that. Especially if we're going to live that kind of life, we need to go back to him again and again and again and again and again, because he never runs out. Never runs out of strength, never runs out of water, never runs out of food, never runs out of comfort, never runs out of truth, never runs out of peace. You can lean on him forever. And it doesn't matter how confused, how foolish you've been, how lost you are. You can go back to him again and again and again and again. But there's another part of this that I want you to see, because we love this verse for us. And I do too, and we should. Because that's what Jesus was saying. He was saying it to you. He was saying, come to me, come to Jesus, and he will refresh your life and be your oasis. But you cannot forget, Christian, that you are God's representative on earth. And the people around you at work and at school and in your neighborhood and in your family, they're not banging down the doors to get a Bible to find hope. You know what your job is? Your job in your neighborhood and in your school and at work, you're the one who says this. So I want you to think about that person in your life right now who is weary, who's burdened, who is being crushed by the chaos of life. Are you able to say this to them? You don't say it the same way he does. But you say, hey, are you weary? Are you carrying a heavy burden? Come to me, and I'll show you how you can refresh your life. And I will show you where your oasis is. That's what you do. And that is why it is worth it to trust that God knows what he's talking about. So build the strongest house you can possibly build, starting right now. And then give it away. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me just for a minute? Because some of you guys I know in this room and connected online, maybe you tuned in today or you came in the room today and you don't have that solid hope that Paul talked about, that you know that you have been forgiven and the slate has been wiped clean, and when Jesus died on the cross, you don't know if that was for you, and today that clicks and that makes sense for you, and you want to know for sure that if you were to die today, you would go to heaven, and I just want to give you the opportunity to respond and to receive that free gift. See, Jesus, he came to earth and he said, believe in me and I will give to you as a free gift eternal life. And so if you today don't have that hope and you want it, you can do something very simple. You can just pray a prayer to God that says, Jesus, I know that I've sinned, I've done things wrong, but I believe that you died for me, and I am receiving right now that gift of salvation. And I thank you that it'll never be taken away from me. You know, if that was you, I would love to know that you made that decision today, not to embarrass you or to make you come forward or anything like that. I just love to pray for you. And so if that was you, I'm going to have you raise your hand just here in a second so that I can pray for you. And so if that made sense and you're here in the room with us today and you placed your faith in Christ for the first time, you said, I believe that Jesus Christ died for me and I'm asking him for that gift of salvation. If that was you, would you just slip your hand up just for a second and put it right back down? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And if you're watching online or you're listen to this later, you can shoot us a text if that was you and that made sense. We would love to connect with you and help you get started. You can send us a text at the number 313131 with the word believe. That way we can connect with you no matter where you are and help you get started. Well, God, we thank you that you have given us a way to build a life that will stand. We thank you that you have not hidden from us the truth about what works and what doesn't work in the world. And God, I just pray for you to just keep at bay the shame and the regret and the fear and the doubt that may come at us because of the decisions we've made in the past, or even the things that we're involved in right now where we don't know how to dig out of the holes we've gotten ourselves into. God, you are the one who reaches down and picks us up and gives us a new start. And so we just pray that you would give us clarity about what it looks like to start right here and right now, and to do things in a way that lines up with what you say is good and true. And God, we ask that you would give us the courage when we build that life to give it away. In Jesus' name, amen. We're going to sing a couple songs as we close, and it's going to give you a chance